This is the Outpost RBA podcast, where we lead security teams to higher ground and new perspectives needed to secure the frontiers of enterprise, with hosts Will Robus and Stuart McIntosh.
Hello, Stuart. It's good to see you again, as always.
Good to see you. The season of the day up here in Wisconsin is a bitter, cold spring day. Yesterday it was winter, so
somewhere in between winter and not winter. Those are the two seasons.
good. Well, it's green grass with snow on top, so that I think that pictures it quite well.
Yeah, conflicted. Well, yeah. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. Listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Outpost RBA podcast. Before we get into our topic today, we always like to start out with a couple of ways that you can get involved with other security professionals around defensive security, threat detection, security alerting. We're really kind of focused on the blue team side of things, but of course that affects all the other parts of security. So the kind of central point to get involved is a website that we've put together around the RBA community. And that website address is simply rba.community. It's the kind of central point for an active and growing group. I think we have over 700 people in the group right now. I think most continents of the world are represented. I think we're not to Antarctica yet. We brought that up.
Not yet.
Up in every episode, but yeah, it's a really cool and active group. Like I said, it's full of RBA enthusiasts, security practitioners, in large and small companies, as well as Splunkers and Splunk partners. So we do get broader topics of kind of, like I said, defensive security, but it's a lot of Splunk practitioners, and then of course the risk-based alerting that's built out in ES. And appropriately, we have a lot of ES and Splunk and RBA experts. On one of our meetups the other day, the unofficial statistic was if someone posted a question in one of the chat rooms, somebody got back to them, an expert got back to them in between like 5 and 10 minutes with some type of answer or clarification. So really, really powerful way to leverage experience that's out there from around the world. We also have a couple of events every month. Most of them are 2 or 3 flavors. The first one is a meetup that just helps people get started with RBA. We try to connect them with other members of the group. There's success stories that people share, as well as kind of lessons learned and kind of challenges, and how hopefully they figured them out and got past them. And it's also a really quick and easy way to get plugged into the various resources. A lot of them are listed on the RBA community page, but there's also kind of pop-up workshops and presentations from around the community too. So that's the monthly meetup. And then we also have generally a monthly office hours session, we call it. And this is a much more open forum. People bring their questions and answers. We get some of those experts in the room to respond to those kind of questions and challenges. And we've had some really great dialogues over the last couple. So just like the online group is super active, these Q&A sessions are quite active as well. So,
And we've been starting to get a couple more guest speakers in there as well, not only from kind of the consulting or implementation side, but also customers sharing what's worked for them and where they're at with securing their organizations, which has been really great to kind of help hear from them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though it can feel like a lonely job sometimes, you are not out there alone. So that's one of the connecting kind of features that we like to highlight. And then finally, the Splunk.conf is coming up in July. It's in Las Vegas. I think it officially starts on the 17th. Stuart and I, along with the RBA community, are going to be hosting a real life meetup, probably on that evening, the 17th, right before the boss of the SOC, which is also a really cool event at .conf if you've never done it. Stuart and I have done it a couple of times, and I'm kind of a Splunk noob, and I even thought it was super fun. So get your T&E requests into your corporate travel department, or beg your significant other to let you go to Vegas for a few days. It's going to be a really, really great. It's always a really great conference from an education standpoint, but it's also a great way to see people in real life and turn these digital connections we have into in-person connections. So that leads us into our main topic of discussion today. And so the title we're calling is Security Symphony. And to introduce that, I've got a little fun story from my background. Stuart's known me for a long time, so he knows I like to tell stories. But and we both like to tell stories. But so this story goes back to all the way back to my college days. And not to date myself, but it was a decade or more ago. So I had a bit of a down semester in between kind of my gen ed and getting into business school. So I decided to take a class called Introduction to the Symphony. And it seemed interesting. I wanted to kind of expand my horizons, arts and culture wise. I was kind of hoping it was going to be one of those clap for credit classes where I could just show up and be surrounded by football and basketball players and get some free easy credits. But unfortunately, it was not a clap for credit class. It was a legit music major, deep dive into the history and the mechanics of classical music and the symphony. But really interesting, learned a lot. But the one moment that will stick with me probably forever is we were in a discussion section, and the TA was leading. It was because it was a big lecture. I think general lecture was a couple hundred students. And he walked in one day with the vinyl version of the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper. And so he put the vinyl on the turntable, played us a track. The track was A Day in the Life of, and right about in the middle of the song, it kind of escapes into this sort of dream world or this parallel dimension, if you will. And the way the Beatles composed it was kind of this very janky arrangement of music. And the example that he was making in the class was, so this is the concept of musical dissonance, and it's atonality, and it's meant to make you feel unresolved. And they use that in the song once when they go into that dream sequence. And then as they kind of trail off at the end of the song, it gets super, super dissonant, loud, and almost ugly sounding. And then they kind of wrap it up with this resolving kind of tone to the end of it. So this was my first introduction to the concept of dissonance, and being an audio introduction, it was something that stuck with me and was super interesting to me. Another good example of this is if you're at a show or a musical, when before they drop the house lights, you hear the orchestra tuning up, and it's this kind of, again, like atonal, almost noise in your ears, but it's an interesting experience, and I certainly remember it and kind of feel something from it. And then, of course, if you really want to go down this rabbit hole, this famous composer, Arnold Schoenberg, was the father of atonal compositions in classical music back in, I think, the early 20s. So I've listened to him a little bit.
How are you going to connect this to security?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So in working with all the companies that we've been working with the past several years, the concept of dissonance from a music standpoint is I translate that the feeling to what we see inside of security organizations that are trying to wrangle in security from an operations standpoint, from an enterprise standpoint. And we see these different groups, we see all of this disparate data, security tooling and silos. And when you look at it as a whole, it looks and feels that it has a lot of this dissonance factor. And so
everyone's playing, they may be playing the same song, but no one knows where the other groups are at. They're all just doing their own thing. And so when you look at it, it's just kind of chaotic.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it's chaos on chaos and chaos. I mean, because sometimes you can't see everything or don't even know what another group's working on. And when you even an analyst, when they get an alert, they're constantly popping into all these different portals and trying to string together this different pieces of information. So that's my long introduction to the metaphor of what the current state of security feels like in a lot of organizations.
I can see the feeling. Like, I don't disagree at all. I think we work in a space that is full of technical descriptions or engineering approaches or engineering methodologies. And I think we don't necessarily open ourselves to concepts from outside of those types of roles or fields. So I like the idea of just step back and say, hey, when I step back and look at what's going on in my security program, does it feel harmonious? Does it feel melodic? Or does it sound like screeching sirens to a fire? Yeah, it absolutely elicits a feeling if I think about stuff in that way. Yeah.
And you commonly use the term whack-a-mole. And I think that is kind of put that in that context.
And I think so maybe continuing the metaphor, let's say whether subconscious or consciously people feel the same stress as well, right? Like they feel this dissonance and so they want to solve it, right? Like, because you even said the goal of it in music is to elicit completion. Like, I want to resolve this. I want to bring this into something that feels better. I think that's true in our space as well. But I think the tools that people reach for to resolve it in our space tend to be that whack-a-mole, band-aids, or like here, that unfortunately we see people reach for automation. We see people reach for AI or ML type detections because they struggle to get their detections working. Like it's almost like these individual potential fixes because no one stepped back to actually just conduct. Like no one stepped back to say, okay, how do we bring each of these sections into harmony? Instead, it's like, well, you guys solve your own problems, and people are they're doing the best they can with what they see. And I think the goal is how do we help them see to the left and to the right, and now all of a sudden you might get more harmony.
Yeah, and that's kind of the second part of the metaphor story that I like is if you feel the dissonance and see the dissonance, well, then the goal becomes how do we resolve this? And so as a leader, really the vision of resolving the dissonance or bringing it all together, of creating this harmony, is one of being a conductor and working with each individual group and discipline and with what they're playing or how they're doing it, and not only making them sound good or work well, but also making them work well with the other players in the organization or the orchestra, if you will.
And here we've kind of brought it up before about misaligned incentives. I think in that role of being conductor, you have to help teams deal with if one group is succeeding, that their measurement of success isn't inherently degrading the ability to succeed of another team. You, like, as a conductor, you have to make sure that that the tide lifts all boats. Like that's part of your role, is to make sure that we're not leaning too much one way or another, but we're attempting to balance where everyone's going.
Yeah, I like that. Can you think of any examples that we've that we've
Of
seen?
dissonance?
No. Well,
I think every listener is already thinking of at least one or two specific situations where they've been in a meeting or been on a project and they have tried to bring up an outside opinion or another perspective and it went on deaf ears. So yeah, that's easy. No, but what were you thinking?
I meant so on the pulling out the melody sort of amidst this chaos and this dissonance. Can you think of any little anecdotes or stories that we've seen almost as like a mini win or a success piece that?
Yeah, I think I mean, I would go for where the friction is, and that's where I would start. And the reason I say that is because that friction exists because of this dissonance. Like, period. If two groups are not getting along or not collaborating effectively, and everyone knows a strained relationship, everyone can see it. They see it in the emails. They see it in the tone that emails are written. You can see it on people's faces. So, and specifically, I'll just call it out. This tends to happen most frequently between people writing detections and people responding to alerts or results of detections. There almost always some resistance between the two groups. And so a mini, like, how do we get some harmony is literally just having a meeting where we get to know each other. So I'm an analyst, you're a detection engineer. Let's just have a meeting and talk about like your experience in security and my experience and get to know people as people. And then let's start peeling apart. What is your team being asked to do? And then I'll share what my team's being asked to do. And we both want to help each other be successful, but we may not even know what's being asked of the other team or can appreciate the stress put on them. Every day when there's more attacks being published, more ransomware notifications, I absolutely believe the pressure on detection engineers is dialed up about, well, are we safe? Are we not? What are you doing to make sure we're safe? Like, I'm sure that there's a lot of pressure. And meanwhile, on the analyst side, they got to keep up because that's the other part. So I think they have more in common than not. It's just you have to remove or dissolve some of the emotion and help see it from their perspective. So I think, like, as a mini, just like, what have I seen help some of these groups change things around? It's that level of humanity between at least a couple people of these two groups.
Yeah. So, I mean, that first step is really trying to understand what drives the other group across the aisle, if you will. And that, yeah, we've seen that be the foundational. That's where you start. And then, I mean, I think that leads to, and what we've seen be extremely successful, especially kind of in the systems approach with RBA, is the creation of these feedback loops. So these communication paths and tools and almost utilities that, so if you understand the other group and what helps them, what hurts them, kind of their limitations and bottlenecks, and then have a continuous feedback loop to enable the flow of that information from one group to the other. That's how that's the workflow version of melodic harmony, really.
And maintaining it and understanding when you lose it again, right? Because that's part of this is once you get into this harmony, how do we preserve it? How do we hold on to it and get back to it quickly rather than having to start this whole thing over? The thing that's great about the feedback loops is that it's almost like together mutually, we said, here's the best way to provide feedback, and here's the best way for me to accept it. And so what happens is it with clear heads, you're providing constructive things back from a perspective that they can relate to. And so what might come off as critiquey or telling me how to do my job or micromanaging peers, all of a sudden becomes, I trust them. So whatever they give me in this form factor of feedback, I'm going to fold it into what I'm doing because I know they're not going to ask if it wasn't important. They're not just generating work so that I'm busy and they're not. They're trying to become more effective and efficient. So if I can help that, I want to, because they're going to give the same back to me. And that's what I think these loops, these feedback loops, that's what ends up resulting. But what's great is whenever we walk into companies, you can't say any of this at the beginning of the project because it is like, this is not Dr. Phil. I'm not here for this. I need you to tell those analysts how to do their job. And it's like, yeah. And then you talk to analysts and they're like, you need to tell the detection people how to write better detections. It's like, yeah. And at the end of it, they're like, hey, isn't this great? And all you did is kind of like warm up the water to these feedback loops because they just never had constructive mechanisms of supplying that information to each other.
Yeah. And so those are those sort of interactions between groups. And then the feedback loops are only enabled because of the overall kind of systems approach. I mean, when you attack risk-based alerting and try to put it into your program, it starts with the data that's coming in to your SIEM, and that flows into a methodology to write the detections in a risk-based way. That those results are then centralized and then kind of aggregated and correlated to create what the analysts get as an alert. But that's a very prescriptive path, right? There's ways to do each one of those critical pieces, and they work together as a system if you implement them as parts of a system. And what's been fun to see for us when working with customers is when you get to introduce to them the whole system and say, this is your new reality. This is what we're going to put in and build here. And this is how it all works together in concert. And each person has each role still exists and is critical, but they almost get a new appreciation for what the specific things they do will affect the next group kind of down that chain.
I think it's because, again, a lot of these groups have different leaders, different managers, maybe even different VPs, like depending on what kind of setup they have as an organization. And I think that lends itself easily to the brick walls where you just throw stuff down the line. So the data team never gets a full appreciation of downstream when that data is processed, when it's manipulated, surfaced from visibility, alerted on, and saves the company from a ransomware attack. No one at the data team even knows what happened. They have no appreciation for that downstream. It's like they never saw the car leave the assembly line, so they don't know. There's not as much sense of pride or contribution to that net goal because they don't see how they contributed to it necessarily. And I think as soon as you surface that harmony, that melody, where you say, listen, the reason this melody is rounded out so well is because you played those lower notes. All high notes isn't rich sounding. It's because you're playing those low notes. It's not saying you're better or worse. It's saying everything is better because you played your part, they played their part, and now we're playing our part. And I think that's especially if they're different managers, who knows how much this moves up the food chain as far as maybe the managers have strained relationships as well. for other reasons, for budgetary reasons. Like that person got all of our budget this year and we got none, right? There's other stressors that can lead to disrupting that harmony.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's just a new way to look at it. And I mean, the metaphor aside, picturing myself as a leader, and when I'm engaged in efforts and teams, the thought of trying to herd cats is not fun and challenging, whereas if I'm trying to conduct an orchestra and execute the executed playing of a symphony, that is just a more positive way to look at it. It feels better, and we've seen it. We've seen security teams come together and operate as this very tight group, tight system as a whole, but also be really good at executing their individual and kind of group mandates. So it's powerful.
And the thing that's really interesting is the speed or pace and quality of work. That's what blows people's minds when you go all in with RBA and you stand this up and you get everyone singing from the same song sheet. All of a sudden, barriers to getting work done start dissolving because everyone knows the part they play and they know the cadence, because that feedback loop establishes cadences too. It sets pacing. It is the conductor setting that pace of, okay, I know when to jump in now. The other thing that's great about it that we've seen is that it brings these really rich, it surfaces these really rich stories that you can then tell leaders that involves everyone. So it's a great it encapsulates the efforts of teams, multiple teams in a single story that then can be fed to leaders who we've seen them kind of accept this storytelling approach much better to explain where they at as far as, are we secure? Yeah, look, here's a story of what we found yesterday or last week, or here's a story about how this team added an entire platform in weeks. So like that storytelling, that ability to storytell that helps encapsulate everyone's contribution really goes a long way with helping kind of that sense of pride that what we're doing matters as well.
Yeah, capture that evidence of harmony and reward it. Because it's easy. I mean, it's easy to find the dissonance and be like, stop screwing this up, or you have to get better or figure this out. And that's an all too common reality. But it's hard. It's a little harder and more nuanced to kind of reward that success. But
to be honest, it helps defend this approach as well. The thing that I found is it's very easy for outsiders to judge the way these teams are working. What's funny is opinions are free and people are willing to exercise that right. And so they will throw all these opinions that you don't follow the guidelines for cyber fusion, or you're not following the org structure here. But if it's resulting in that harmony and it's delivering the outcomes that are needed for the company, the way to protect and kind of defend that bubble is twofold. One is start grabbing additional business lines to get involved, your HR, your compliance group, other IT groups, because involvement naturally helps that defense. The other is stories that encapsulate the value of this harmony, like you were saying, because that is what will stick with leaders as they talk to other business leaders, not only peers in other companies, but also peers within their own organization who see scary headlines. And every time they ask about security, they get some technical, this acronym was installed yesterday, so we're good. And they're like, I have no idea what that means. I have no idea. I work in marketing. I have no idea what you just said to me. But these stories make them feel like, oh, okay, yeah, they're doing some really good stuff to protect us. So yeah, it comes in with almost that natural defense of itself as well.
Yeah, and we've seen it sort of, I mean, there's this natural gap between the leadership level and then the kind of the people in the trenches, on the front lines.
It's another dissonance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so even just the leader taking a step back, looking at it through the lens of a systems coordination, conducting of an orchestra, and getting everyone singing from the same song sheet, as you said, versus, I mean, just trying to chase the problem of the week or the day with some other solution or
framework.
Yeah.
How many frameworks do we see imposed out there?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that was really my motivation in putting it through the Symphony lens. And I got to tell a fun story that I haven't told in a long time. So
I appreciate trying to ascribe different framings or models into what we do, because I do think in order to get out of the current problems, we have to think different than the way we were that made them.
Exactly.
And so if we're not stretching our own kind of mental approaches here, we're going to struggle getting our way out of this.
Yeah. And there are systems out there. I mean, we talk about RBA and enterprise security, every day. And it's the other part is, I think we know that a lot of companies are closer than they realize. And it's more just a matter of reorientating your strategy and your approach. And it starts with the idea of like, this is a system, and we get it to just work together, we can change how we do business in a very, very positive way.
Agreed. No argument there. No arguments.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that wraps up what we had planned to talk about. I usually like to end with kind of a challenge call. If you're interested in what we talked about today, if you're interested in kind of being a RBA champion or a systems change kind of champion in your organization, please reach out to Stuart or I. You can find us on our website.
Or if this gave you something different or a new thought for your own organization, would love to hear it. Because so sometimes it's easy in this form factor to think you're talking to a void, or it's not applicable, or a lot of self-judgment comes in here. So I love hearing like, okay, it helped me understand that this person I was talking to really isn't a jerk. They're just trying to meet what's being asked of them. And we sat down and talked about it, and now we kind of get it. We're not friends yet, but we get each other. And that's where you start.
Yeah, absolutely. That seeking to understand. I think that was a Covey, one of the 7 things. But yeah. So anyway, check us out at our website, outpost-security.com. Sign up for our Slack group, which is what we mentioned before as part of that community kind of messaging board. That is at our website, again, outpost-security.com /Slack-sign up. That's too many alliterations there. We might have to change that URL.
Too many. Yeah, we might have to change that.
So I'll try that again. outpost-security.com /Slack-sign up. Or it's just linked on the menu bar at top. And of course, Stuart and I are on LinkedIn. Check out the RBA community page at rba.community. And yeah, thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Outpost RBA podcast. Stuart McIntosh has over 20 years of experience building and maturing security programs inside Fortune 500 companies. In 2018, he gave a talk at Splunks.conf titled "Say Goodbye to Your Big Alert Pipeline and Say Hello to Your New Risk-Based Approach," which started the rise of RBA. As the creator and architect of risk-based alerting, he pioneers security methodologies at Outpost Security, which he co-founded with Will. Will Robus has spent the last 20 years in the operations or financial C-suites at technology and security companies, focused on what drives results and successful scaling. At Outpost Security, he works with CISOs to imagine a more expansive future for their SOC, once it has a solid RBA foundation. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share it with your security team and CISO. Connect with us on LinkedIn and contact us at outpost-security.com to lift your team out of the fog of alert confusion with RBA 0 to 1.